Hi, Dave Holcomb here again for FootballNation.com. It may be August 1st and really hot in certain parts of the East Coast and other areas of the United States, but today we're going to talk about cold weather Super Bowls. The Pittsburgh Steelers owner Art Rooney II filed a formal application to bring Super Bowl 57 to the Steel City. Now, if you don't have your Super Bowl calendar handy, that'll be the Super Bowl that's hosted in the year 2023. There are plenty of pros and cons to bringing the Super Bowl to a cold weather and smaller marketplace like Pittsburgh. One pro, at least for me, is you get to have the Super Bowl in a place that loves football. The Super Bowl should be played in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Green Bay, Chicago, even Buffalo. These places are where football is at its best, and that is where the big game, the most important game of the year, should be played more often than not. Others disagree and say outside cold weather Super Bowls is a con because they don't want the game to be affected by the weather. Now, they do have a point there, and for those of you that say, well, the game wasn't affected a couple years ago in New York when there was a cold weather Super Bowl. Well, it very well could have been if there was a big storm in New Jersey, New York area, just a day after the Super Bowl in 2014, February of 2014. So if that storm had hit a day earlier, we could have had a disaster on our hands, not just for the game itself being affected by the weather, but how would people have gotten to the game in a snowstorm? So that is obviously a pro and con, but that's not just the only thing to overcome to bring the Super Bowl to Pittsburgh. There are lots of other requirements. Let's go through a couple of them. A Super Bowl host city must have 30,000 hotel rooms in a 90-minute driving radius of the stadium. Now, Pittsburgh has 36,000 hotel rooms in that radius, and they're building over 2,000 more. So they meet that requirement, and in the next 8 years, they could very easily build a lot more hotel rooms. Traditionally, the host stadium also has 70,000 or more seats. 43 of the 49 Super Bowls have met that requirement, although it's not an official requirement. Heinz Field doesn't have 70,000 seats. It only has 65,000. Surprisingly, it's one of the smaller stadiums in the league. They're adding 3,000 more seats to the stadium this year, but will they have to add even more seats to make it a possible location for the big game? But according to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, that's just the first two big requirements to bringing the Super Bowl to a city like Pittsburgh. Here are some of the other requirements. 35,000 free parking spaces, free police escort for team owners, free billboards, free presidential suites at top hotels, and other perks for the league. That's going to cost a lot of taxpayers' dollars. It did for Minneapolis, and in their case, they had to grant the NFL all those things before the NFL gave them the bid for the Super Bowl that's coming up in the next couple of years. In order to combat some of those costs, Minneapolis had a city host committee raise $30 million in private pledges so they could ease the taxpayers' dollars and not take as much taxpayers' money to fund the Super Bowl. So that is a big issue that all these things need to be worked out before Pittsburgh is a legitimate Super Bowl host candidate. But the big pro for people in Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, that say it's going to cost way too much money to bring the big game there, well, there is a big payback reward, if you will, if you do end up hosting the Super Bowl. Last year, a study says that in Arizona, they had a $719.4 million gross income economic impact to the area around the stadium, to that neighborhood. So imagine that kind of money fluxed into a place like Pittsburgh. All of the costs would then pay itself out, and the reward would be much greater than the risk. But what do you viewers out there think? Should the NFL consider cold weather cities like Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago, Green Bay for Super Bowls in the next decade? Can a small market like Pittsburgh fund the Super Bowl and meet all the requirements without crippling taxpayers and the city as a whole? Let me know what you think. Tweet at me at DMHOLCOMB. You can also send me an email, holcombmdavid@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook as well. Search Dave's Football News.